Welcome back to Product Data Weekly. This is a short practical podcast where each week we break down the operational issues that slow down launches, creates manual work, or quietly limits growth inside product data and e-commerce teams. There's no theory, no hype, just what we actually see happening inside of catalogs at scale. And I'm Claire, I'm the co-founder of SKU Launch and Start With Data. And
hi everyone, it's Ben again here.
Right, so Ben, what are we covering off today?
So today we thought we'd just do a bit of more of a quick fire episode. So we want to talk about before you buy the software, right? So this is like 4 things you should definitely do before you commit to doing like an e-commerce replatform or a PIM project, right? Or a PIM implementation, specifically around the product data side of things. I mean, I appreciate there's lots of other tenets to like an e-commerce replatform, but what we're talking about here is primarily around the product data kind of readiness side of things. Okay, so we know from kind of being in the center of the market that so many PIM and e-commerce platforms run late, right, and very over budget. And in fact, PIM particularly has got a terrible track record, write-offs and overspends and all this sort of stuff. And we know that the technology isn't actually the reason why this happens over and over again. The real reason it happens is the lack of preparation, data preparation, right? Preparation is almost always cheaper than remediation in product data related projects. Okay, so this could be like a brand new implementation of an e-commerce platform where a company didn't have one before, and they need to prepare product data for that new e-commerce platform because everything is dependent on all the filtering, all the navigation, all of the product pages are all dependent on great complete product data. Or another example could be, a company already has an e-commerce platform, they're implementing a PIM. What they usually do is just take all of the old data from their e-commerce platform, which I guarantee you isn't very good, and try and shove it into a PIM, and they see no real value, right? So it's all about preparation around product data. So what we're going to whiz through is kind of 4 steps really that we think these 4 steps you should always do before you commit to any sort of software project around PIM or e-commerce platforms.
Yep.
You want to
cool. So step one is audit where your data lives. So what have you actually got at the moment? And this kind of can't, you just cannot start a project like this unless you know what you've got and where you're getting it from. So it's, finding every place that your product data lives, ERP, e-commerce, shared folders, that spreadsheet that Karen's been working on for 7 years, or a database that nobody knows how it was built so nobody touches, or, all of that, like really dig in and find where everything is. And then what we often see is people are surprised by the number of sources that they've got and the volume of data that they've got. They're also very surprised by the contradictory information between all of those sources. But this is the ultimate starting point because it will inform lots of different steps going forward into the project. I mean, you can't plan a migration, for example, a data migration, unless you know what you've got and where it's coming from. It's just that simple. So you should know what data you've got, where it lives, who owns it, and how often it changes. They're the things that if you don't know that, don't do any more at this stage.
Yeah. Or if you don't know that and you just crack on anyway, be prepared to spend 6 months on a data migration readiness project when you've already committed to the board that the e-commerce platform's going live in 10 weeks or 6 weeks, whatever.
Yeah, you will pay for it later, absolutely. Yeah.
All right, so that's step 1, audit where your data lives. Step 2, so the second step is then, so that's kind of this, that's the legacy source. What about where this is all going to, right? So this is all about channels and outputs. So the whole, if you're doing a PIM or an e-commerce platform, you're basically doing it to provision data to end customers or end channels, or B2B, B2C, it doesn't matter, right? And it could be one or many channels. So in order to define what you need to populate in a product data model or a PIM or an e-commerce platform, you need to understand the channels. So, and the kind of data model is guided by the channel requirements, not the other way around, right? You shouldn't take all your sources and build your data model on that, because your sources won't be very good. They probably won't be complete enough for filtering, for search, for SEO, like all of those sorts of things. So what we always say is you should produce basically a list. It's like a kind of a backlog or repository of every destination that data goes to, all the attributes that each of those channels need, the format, whether the attributes need to be localized, whether they need to be contextualized. We often see this exercise done, but then people forget about things like compliance or market specific requirements or localization requirements. Or in some cases, they might forget that, a PIM might be serving like the logistics team for like back office data requirements as well. So you've got to kind of take all of the end outputs you need and kind of work backwards. In an e-commerce platform, those outputs could be all of the attributes and the content that are required to drive all of the features on your site: product page, filtering, navigation, search indexing, SEO, feed management for Google Shopping or Amazon, eBay. It's all of those different things. So the key thing here is like map your outputs first, because the platform, whatever platform you put in, will serve different channels, and you need to understand those outputs. All right.
Yeah.
So that's step 2.
And that ties in nicely to step 3, which may sound really obvious, but you would be surprised at how many times people don't actually do this. And that's defining what good data looks like for your business. And that again, that might be different, as Ben was saying, to the different channels. You might have a B2B portal or a customer facing portal or whatever it happens to be, that the data will look different depending on where it's going or what job it has to do. So if you're defining what good looks like, there's a couple of things that you need to think about. So you need to decide what is mandatory data. You need to decide, the format. So things like, how are you presenting dimensions, or what do your long descriptions look like? That it's the thing that you need to be getting down to that detail. So attribute lists you mentioned before. So it's actually defining the attribute list, deciding what's mandatory, format, and then there should be a publish ready sample that's available that you should be able to kind of point to and say, this is what good data is for our business.
I think what I was just going to add, Claire, as well, is like I think the document this lives in, like we call it like a data dictionary. So it's like, a data dictionary is like a huge spreadsheet with all the channels, all the attribute IDs, names, the format, the type, the rules, like all the things you've just mentioned in one document that you can kind of then like filter by to make sure that you've got everything for every channel, right? Yep. And I think a lot of people just don't. I think they're scared of that because that is what it is. It's a big document of all your attributes, right?
Yeah, and look, when you throw around terms like data dictionary, you think of somebody sat in a data governance team.
Yeah.
And it's not. It does. We produce these for businesses that have catalogs of 1,000, but we have also done them for massive businesses. But it's the same principle regardless of whether you're a B2C, B2B, or how big or small your catalog is. You need to actually define that, and a data dictionary does a really good job of doing that because it's all in one document. You've got I think the other important thing to do is, when I say we have done that for a customer, we have guided the customer in doing that, because the business has to own that. We can't enforce that on them. It has to come from within their business, but we obviously guide them into how to do that. There should be one single accountable owner. We did a masterclass yesterday, and I think we now call them the product data owner rather than just the product owner. So there should be that, and that there's input from every team that comes in that touches the product data, and then that sits in that definition document.
Yeah, all right. And then the last step is kind of the most obvious one, really, which is fill the gaps, right? So you've got this new target, you've defined what good looks like, you've got all your sources. You now need to fill in all the gaps that the sources can't fill in, or in many cases you need to run like a transformation of the sources to the target and then start filling all the gaps. Most businesses just basically take the approach of we'll fix this in the new system. A PIM or an e-commerce platform doesn't fix your data. It doesn't. I don't know how many times we have to say this. It will not magically fill in all your data gaps. PIMs particularly are sold as solutions to this, and the reality is they aren't, right? They will not. They will give you a new shell. They won't fill the data. So you need to run a data enrichment and migration project alongside your implementation once you to start filling these gaps. And often it's such a big task. If you're migrating or enriching 10,000 SKUs, it's a huge task. But if you migrate incomplete data, it will surface huge gaps in your downstream channels that then you'll just have to do rectification on later. Yep. And this is, the number of times we see on like LinkedIn announcements of like new e-commerce platforms go live. The first thing Claire and I do is go straight on the e-commerce platforms to see if their product data is there or not. Yeah. And you can probably guess what the outcome is most of the time. So.
And obviously, you can't fill the gaps unless A, you know what you've got, B, you know where to find it, and C, you can actually say what you want it to look like.
Let's just kind of close with a bit of a listener challenge, right? So this could take you a few days if you really want to do it, right? You should open a blank doc, list every place your product data lives today, write down who owns it. That will take you about an hour. You'll realize you have a hell of a lot more sources than you're officially doing kind of systems and stuff. That way you'll get a good footprint of, where your data kind of currently lives and the scope of data. You could, in theory then, once you've done that and you've got access to those sources, that's probably the best time to go and talk to like software vendors about, PIMs or e-commerce platforms potentially. But, just following that flow we've just gone through, those 4 steps will save you a hell of a lot of money and effort.
Also, just if you get to a demo conversation or a vendor conversation, they will probably ask you a lot of this. What where's your data coming from? Where does it need to go? All of that. So you will already be doing the prep work for that. Cool, excellent. Well, hope you enjoyed that short, sharp action plan. We will see you next week. And as always, if you want more tips and tricks like this, you can sign up to productdataweekly.com, which is our newsletter that comes to your inbox every Thursday. And feel free to share this podcast with anybody that might be relevant in your business. Have a great week.
Thanks a lot. Bye.